The Rolling Stones started out in 1968 working on new material for the next album. Having parted ways with Andrew Loog Oldham and trying their hand at producing the previous year's Satanic Majesty's Request themselves, they decided it was time for a new producer. Mick asked longtime engineer with the band, Glenn Johns, for a recommendation, and he suggested Jimmy Miller. From 1968 to 1973, he would go on to produce the next 5 studio albums for what many people consider to be the golden era of the Stones. After some time off, the band started rehearsals at RG Studios for pre-production sessions in March. They were joined by Jimmy Miller, and they immediately hit it off with him while working on demos of songs that Mick and Keith had written in the previous months. These rehearsals soon led to album sessions at Olympic Studios from April to May. During the rehearsals, Keith mainly used his Gibson non-reverse Firebird 7 and his Gibson Les Paul Custom Black Beauty. Keith had acquired this late 1950s Les Paul Custom in 1966, and it was one of his favorite guitars for the next several years live and in the studio. During this time period, Keith and his girlfriend, Anita Pallenberg, painted a full-color psychedelic moon mural to the face of the guitar. The Les Paul Custom was Gibson's top-of-the-line model, built with a mahogany neck, back, and sides, as well as a carved mahogany top. It featured a single-bound ebony fretboard, block inlays, and gold hardware, like most of Gibson's top-tier guitars. The headstock was differentiated from less expensive models by a 5-piece diamond-shaped inlay. The guitar was finished in black with a deluxe multiple-bound top and back and 3 PAF humbucking pickups. It was nicknamed the Fretless Wonder because of its low frets. Also in 1966, Keith and Brian acquired a pair of brand new Gibson non-reverse Firebird 7s. These guitars were used interchangeably by the two while touring and would resurface many times throughout the years. By the end of 1965, Gibson decided to redesign the first line of Firebirds, since the reverse body of the original line was deemed too radical. The new body was confusingly to some reversed, with the top horn now protruding farther than the bottom horn. The headstock was redesigned as well and was fitted with traditional style tuners on the top side rather than the banjo tuners on the underside of the reverse model. The body was solid mahogany with a set mahogany neck, rosewood fingerboard, and dot inlays. There were 4 variations, the Firebird 1, 3, 5, and 7, with the appointments getting increasingly more deluxe the higher the number. The Stones went with the top-of-the-line Model 7 here as well, which had 3 gold Firebird humbucking pickups, gold hardware, a tunematic bridge, and a deluxe Maestro Vibrola. Brian Jones was hardly contributing to the band at this point, and this would be his last album with the band. When he was present, he used Keith's Gibson ES 330 TD, since Keith was still under the spell of his Les Paul Custom. Keith acquired this guitar in 1967. ES stands for Electro Spanish and TD stands for Thin Line Dual Pickup. This was Gibson's fully hollow body model, similar to the Epiphone Casino that was also made in the Kalamazoo plant. It was a double cutaway with laminated maple top, back, and sides, F-holes, and single binding on the top and bottom edges. It featured a mahogany set neck with rosewood fingerboard and small perloid block inlays, and was fitted with 2 nickel-plated P90s. Keith removed the black pickguard that came with the Sunburst model. Also present at the sessions was Keith's blue Fender Telecaster. Keith used a mixture of amplifiers during the Olympic sessions, including the Vox Supreme, Vox UL 760, Vox AC 30, and a newly acquired Triumph Silicon 100. These Olympic sessions resulted in Beggar's Banquet, which was released in December of '68. Jumpin' Jack Flash was released as the first single in May. During this time, Keith was experimenting with open tunings, which became one of the most important factors of the band's sound, and helped make Beggar's Banquet a return to their raw, blues-based primal form of rock and roll. Keith explained, "I started to use open tunings on Beggar's Banquet. During that long recording layoff after Between the Buttons, I got rather bored with what I was playing on guitar. Maybe because we weren't working and it was part of that frustration of stopping after all those years and suddenly having nothing to do. So my playing sort of stopped along with me. Then I started to look into some 20s and 30s blues records. Slowly, I began to realize a lot of them were in very strange tunings. Anyway, I eventually got into open D tuning, which I used on Beggar's Banquet. Street Fighting Man is all that. Child of the Moon was one of the early open tuning numbers on the electric guitars, because Street Fighting Man was all acoustic guitars. The acoustic Keith used was a 1960s Gibson Hummingbird. He recorded multiple layers of acoustic tracks on a cassette recorder and stacked them on top of each other. Jumpin' Jack Flash was recorded in the same fashion, with layers of open tune guitars stacked on top of each other, this time in open E tuning, which is the same intervals as open D, just higher. Toward the end of May, it was announced that the Stones would appear in a film by the French New Wave director, Jean-Luc Godard. The film was a mixture of documentary footage of the Stones working on Sympathy for the Devil at Olympic Studios, intercut with scripted scenes of Black Panthers, Marxists, feminists, and a mishmash of other contemporary political and social material of the time. That part of the film was largely panned, but the footage of the Stones is a great snapshot of them transforming a song into a masterpiece in the studio. It starts with them working through Sympathy from its beginnings as an acoustic Dylan-esque number, with Keith playing a Gibson Hummingbird in open D with a capo on the second fret. Keith then starts playing bass on a Sunburst precision bass, which completely uplifts the song with the groove we all know and love. At a later date, Keith recalled, "Sympathy for the Devil started as an acoustic folk song and ended up as a mad samba with me playing bass and overdubbing guitar later. That's why I don't like to go into the studio with the song worked out beforehand. You can write the song, but you've got to give the band something so they can use their imagination as well. You can write down the notes, but you can't put down factor X, which is important in rock and roll, the feel." After wrapping filming at Olympic and spending a few months mixing and mastering, Beggar's Banquet was released on December 7th in the US and peaked at number 5 in the charts. It received positive reviews worldwide. The month prior, the band had the idea to produce a TV special called The Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. It would feature performances by Taj Mahal, The Who, Jethro Tull, Marianne Faithfull, the one-off supergroup known as the Dirty Mac, followed by a closing set by the Rolling Stones. The show was directed by Michael Lindsay-Hogg, who also filmed the Beatles' Get Back Project and Rooftop Concert. Here he is asking John Lennon to film a segment introducing the Rolling Stones. Keith Richards was also featured introducing The Who before their segment. The Dirty Mac was a powerhouse band put together to play John Lennon's song Your Blues, as well as another jam featuring John Lennon on vocals and guitar, Eric Clapton playing lead guitar, Keith Richards playing bass, and Mitch Mitchell from the Jimi Hendrix Experience playing drums. Lennon played his sanded down Epiphone Casino, Clapton played his cherry red Gibson ES 335, and Keith Richards played bass on his Sunburst Fender Precision bass. For the Stones segment of the film, Keith mostly used his moon-painted Gibson Les Paul Custom. For amplification, he used the Triumph Silicon 100 slaved into a Vox Foundation bass amp. Brian Jones mostly played a then-new 1968 Les Paul Gold Top that Gibson reissued that year. This guitar featured 2 cream-colored P90 pickups, a mahogany body and neck, with a gold-finished maple top and a rosewood fretboard. Differences from the 1950s Gold Tops included a chrome-plated stop tailpiece and 2 pneumatic bridge instead of nickel, and different gold knobs with metal inserts for volume and tone. For amplification, Brian played through a new blackface Fender Dual Showman. On No Expectations, Brian played slide on his Firebird 7 tuned to open E. Keith switched to a Gibson SJ200 that Brian was also pictured with during the album sessions at Olympic. Gibson's Super Jumbo model was dubbed King of the Flat Tops because it was the largest, most deluxe, and expensive flat top yet. It was constructed with maple back and sides, a solid spruce top, a maple neck with rosewood board, and a mustache-shaped bridge and jumbo pickguard with engraved flowers. This would be Brian Jones' last live performance with the band. He seemed to be a shadow of his former self, was hardly contributing to the band at this point, and his inability to tour due to not being able to obtain a U.S. visa because of drug arrest would end up being the last straw for the band. Ultimately, the TV special would be shelved and not released until 1996 because the band felt their performance was not up to par. Mick and Keith would go into 1969 with a lot to think about.